At just 9 years old, Althea from Cebu had already learned what most adults never do, that sometimes the loudest battles happen in silence. While millions of kids dream of fame, she dreamed of something simpler: getting her mother out of the hospital. And the only weapon she had was her voice. In a small coastal town in Cebu, the waves rolled calmly every morning, like they were whispering secrets only the locals understood. Among the narrow streets and weathered homes stood a tiny blue house, where 9-year-old Althea lived with her parents. Unlike most kids her age who laughed loudly, ran barefoot with friends, and chased kites along the shoreline, Althea was quiet, not shy, but thoughtful. She carried a calmness that made people instantly soften around her, as if she were a reminder that gentleness can exist even in tough places. Her father, a hard-working fisherman, left before sunrise and returned long after sunset, sunburned and exhausted. Her mother, once full of life, now spent most days battling an illness that doctors couldn't explain without expensive tests. Their income was barely enough for electricity and food, and although their situation weighed heavily on the family, they chose to love fiercely rather than complain. That's the kind of home Althea grew up in. Every night, before bed, Althea's mother would ask her to sing, not out of habit, but because her voice had a power that felt like medicine. Her mother often said, "You don't just sing with your mouth, you sing with your heart." And Althea believed that. She didn't see singing as entertainment. To her, it was comfort, hope, a thread that kept their small family from unraveling. On weekends, while other children practiced dance routines or played games, Althea sat by the window watching old singing competitions on a borrowed cell phone. Her eyes sparkled every time she saw singers stand on big stages, especially kids like her. She didn't envy them, she admired them, studying how they held the microphone, how they breathed before belting a high note, even how they looked nervous sometimes. She whispered to herself, "If they can do it, maybe someday I can too." But she didn't dare say it out loud. Dreams were expensive in Cebu, especially for a child who couldn't afford new shoes, let alone singing lessons. One evening, during another silent hospital visit, Althea sang Shiloh while holding her mother's hand. She sang so gently that even the busy nurses slowed down to listen. One nurse, wiping away tears, knelt beside Althea and said, "You don't know how powerful your voice is. You could be on TV someday, sweetheart." Althea blushed and shook her head. She didn't believe she was special, but for some reason, her heart remembered that sentence. Long after the nurse walked away that night, while her mother slept, Althea stepped outside the hospital and stared up at the sky. The moonlight reflected off her teary eyes as she whispered her first true wish: "If I could sing on a big stage, not for fame, not for trophies, but so Mama can get better." And though no one heard her, the universe did. What Althea didn't know was that her voice, recorded by a nurse and shared online, was already spreading farther than she could ever imagine. And it was about to lead her somewhere she never dared to dream of. When the email arrived, Althea thought it was a mistake. America's Got Talent audition invitation. She reread it over and over, her small fingers trembling as she held the phone. Her father stared in disbelief while her mother pressed a weak hand to her mouth, crying softly. No one in the room spoke, because none of them had ever imagined that a simple hospital video could travel thousands of miles and change their lives. 3 weeks later, after a whirlwind of documents, paperwork, and borrowed travel money from neighbors who believed in her, Althea found herself stepping through the doors of the AGT arena. The building was massive, brighter, louder, and more overwhelming than anything she had ever seen. People rushed in every direction, some rehearsing lines, others warming up their voices, some crying from nerves. It was a world where confidence roared, and yet, in the middle of it all, was a little girl from Cebu, clutching her father's hand. She wore a simple white dress, not new, but freshly ironed, and shoes slightly too big, gifted by the neighbor who sold second-hand clothing. Her mother couldn't travel, but she had sent her locket, tied around Althea's neck for strength. Althea touched it repeatedly as she waited backstage, listening to the thunderous applause for the contestant before her. A producer bent down, smiling warmly. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" She nodded without speaking. "That's okay," he whispered. "Most people are. But remember, you're here for a reason." Those words helped. But only a little. Suddenly, someone called her name. Bright lights flooded the narrow path to the stage. She could hear the judges talking, the crowd whispering, the cameras clicking. Every step she took made her breath shorter. What if she forgot the lyrics? What if her voice cracked? What if the world decided she wasn't good enough? She looked tiny under the huge spotlights. The judges stared curiously, especially Simon Cowell, whose reputation for toughness intimidated even adults. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk. "What's your name?" he asked. "Althea," she whispered, barely audible. "And how old are you?" 9. The audience soft. A murmur of awe ran through the room. Simon nodded. Double quotes. "Why did you come to AGT?" He asked a simple question, yet it carried more weight than anyone could see. Althea took a shaky breath, gripping the microphone with both hands. She glanced down at the locket at her mother's strength, then lifted her eyes. I want to help my mum get better," she said softly. "She's sick, and I want to sing for her." Silence. A silence so deep that even the cameras paused. The entire arena hung on her words. Simon's expression softened, his voice gentle. "Well, whenever you're ready." The music started. The first note was hers to claim, and as she inhaled, Althea wasn't scared anymore, because she remembered why she came. She wasn't there for a trophy. She wasn't there to prove anything. She was there for love, and that kind of purpose can make even a 9-year-old unbreakable. The first soft chords of Shallow echoed through the arena, and in that instant, time seemed too slow. Althea stood motionless, staring into the blinding lights, trying to ignore the thousands of eyes watching her. Her fingers trembled. Her knees wobbled. For a split second, she wondered if she should run, if a little girl from Cebu truly belonged on the biggest stage in the world. Then she remembered her mother's voice. "You don't just sing with your mouth, you sing with your heart." She closed her eyes. The very first note wasn't loud. It wasn't powerful. It wasn't dramatic. It was delicate. A whisper of pain and love intertwined, and it sent a shock through the audience. The judges leaned in unconsciously, confused at how a sound so soft could feel so heavy. There was purity in her tone that didn't try to impress, yet somehow impressed everyone. As she continued, her voice strengthened and the arena transformed. In her mind, the stage melted away. The spotlights faded. The crowd disappeared. She wasn't in America anymore. She was back in the hospital in Cebu, holding her mother's hand, singing to stop the fear from swallowing them whole. Every lyric carried a memory. "Tell me something, boy." She pictured her father sitting beside her, trying to smile, even though life was getting harder. "I'm off the deep end. Watch as I dive in." She remembered her mother struggling for breath, fighting a battle none of them could afford to lose. Crash through the surface. She imagined a world where her mother could finally stand, finally laugh, finally live. Tears streamed down. The faces of strangers who didn't even know her story, because somehow they felt it anyway. Halfway through the song, Althea reached the most difficult part, the soaring belted section that even adult singers struggled with. Her breath faltered for a moment. A tiny crack slipped through her voice. Gasps rippled through the audience. Her father, watching from backstage, pressed both hands against his mouth. But Althea didn't freeze. She didn't break. Instead, she stepped forward, as if stepping toward the woman she missed more than anything, and sang with everything inside her. Her tiny lungs carried shocking power. The arena erupted in emotional energy, not from volume, but from truth. The judges stared wide-eyed. Simon Cowell leaned back, stunned, one hand covering his heart. The final notes reverberated through the air like echoes of a prayer. And when the music ended, it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like love in its rawest form. There was no instant applause, no cheering, no screaming. Just silence, the kind of silence that only comes from souls too full to react. Then suddenly, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause shook the room. People cried. People hugged strangers beside them. The world didn't just hear her voice, they felt it. Althea stood frozen, breathing hard, eyes glistening. She didn't know if she had sung well. She only knew she had given everything she Pangean in that moment. She did the one thing not even the greatest singers in the world could do. She left Simon Cowell without a single word. The applause was still shaking the room when the music finally faded from the speakers. Althea stood under the blazing lights, breathing in short, frightened little gasps, not because she feared the audience, but because she didn't know if she had done enough. Had she honored her mother? Had her voice reached her? Had she made all the sacrifices worth it? She clutched the microphone with both small hands, her eyes darting nervously across the judges' faces, searching for a sign, a smile, a nod, anything. How could silence feel louder than cheering? Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, staring at her like he was trying to understand something bigger than talent. This wasn't the reaction he normally gave. He wasn't following his usual judging routine. He wasn't preparing feedback. He wasn't even blinking. He was moved. And not just as a judge, but as a human being. Finally, he stood. The crowd roared louder than before, but Simon didn't raise his hand for quiet. He didn't need to. His voice, low and shaky, cut through the arena. That, he began, swallowing hard, was one of the most emotional performances I've ever seen. Althea's eyes widened. Her father pressed a hand to his chest backstage, trying not to cry. The other judges nodded, some with teary eyes, but Simon wasn't finished. "You didn't sing to impress us," he said. "You sang because you needed to." And the world heard that. A hush washed over everyone. The audience gripped the edges of their seats. Althea stood motionless, unsure if she should smile or cry. Then Simon did something he had done only a handful of times in his entire career. He reached forward and slammed the golden buzzer. In an instant, a thunderous boom shook the arena. Golden confetti exploded downward like a storm of shooting stars. The crowd screamed. Judges stood to their feet. Cameramen spun in every direction. Althea staggered backward, overwhelmed, eyes wide in disbelief. Her father sprinted from backstage, dropping to his knees and wrapping her in his arms. She clung to him like he was the only anchor in a world suddenly spinning out of control. He kissed the top of her head again and again, whispering, "You did it, Anak, you did it." But even through the chaos, the cameras, the confetti, the cheering, there was only one person Althea wanted to see. Her mother. She grabbed her father's hand and pointed toward the screen on stage. The producers, already prepared, played a live video call from Cebu Hospital. A nurse held the phone so her mother could see the television broadcast playing in the room. Her mother's face was tired, but smiling with a glow of hope that no medicine had given her. "Sweetheart," she whispered through the speakers, tears rolling down her cheeks. I felt every note. Althea covered her mouth and sobbed. For a moment, the world disappeared again. It was just a girl and her mother, across an ocean, sharing a miracle made of music. The world saw a performance. But Althea, she saw her mother breathe for the first time in months without pain. The viral moment didn't take days, it took hours. By the next morning, the clip of a 90-year-old Cebu girl singing Shallow with the golden bazoo moment had already crossed 30 million views. Celebrities shared it. News anchors replayed it. Reaction channels analyzed every note. But online views were not what mattered most. What mattered were the messages. Parents writing, "My daughter is sick too, your voice gave us hope." Nurses saying, "I played this in my ward." Patients cried. People from all over the world asking, "Where can we donate?" And donate they did. Money poured in not because the world felt sorry for Althea, but because people felt inspired. Her voice didn't beg for help. It reminded people of love, of family, of the moment we realize something we cannot bear to lose. Goodness traveled post to post, heart to heart, until the hospital in Cebu called with news the family had prayed for. There was now enough money to cover everything. A week later, Althea walked down the hallway of the hospital, not in fear, this time, but with a spark of joy in her step. Her father held the payment folder close to his chest like it was the single most precious object on earth. Doctors and nurses who had watched her video clapped softly as she passed, some wiping their eyes. When they opened the door to her mother's room, she wasn't lying weakly the way Althea remembered. She was sitting upright, exhausted, yes, but alive in a new way. When she saw Althea, she opened her arms. "You saved me," her mother said, voice trembling. But Althea shook her head and nestled into her mother's embrace. "No. You saved me first. You taught me how to be strong. I only sang because you taught me how to love." Her mother cried, the first tears she had shed, not from pain, but from gratitude. Months passed. Treatments worked. Strength returned. And, soon, for the first time in almost a year, her mother walked without assistance. Every step she took felt like a miracle, and every miracle traced back to a song. When the AT finals arrived, Althea returned to the stage, not as a scared 9-year-old, but as a child who had already won something far greater than trophies or television fame. She walked out with her mother, watching proudly from the audience, wearing the same silver locket, only now, she wasn't wearing it for strength. She was wearing it for memory. People expected her to cry when she performed. Again, people expected her to tremble, to break under the pressure of the world watching. But she didn't. Because this time she wasn't singing in fear of losing someone. She was singing in celebration of saving someone. And whether she won the competition or not didn't matter anymore, because the world had already crowned her. With something bigger than gold, she showed millions that love, pure, selfless love, can change lives.